A few years back, me and my friends decided to go camping at the local forest. My friends left early afternoon, but I had work, so I told them when I finished work, I would drive up and meet them there. I was about 15 minutes away, and the sun would set soon. Suddenly, I noticed these two men in the middle of the road, and they were flagging me down. Normally, I wouldn't stop, but this was a friendly country town. It was normal to be quite neighbourly. They told me they were driving through a dirt road and managed to get their car bogged and were hoping I would be able to help them out. I was happy to help them and luckily had all the tools I needed to get them out. I pulled the car out rather easily and we said our goodbyes. I didn't think much of it. The men themselves didn't seem suspicious. I just found it a bit odd that they had a four-wheel drive and couldn't get out of that spot themselves. The car should have been able to pull itself out. Nonetheless, the sun set and I arrived at my destination. My friends already had the fire burning, the music cranking and the beers flowing, so I had some catching up to do. I was downing my beers quickly and instantly feeling the buzz. I needed to take a leak. I headed a short distance to do so. When I finished, I went to turn back and return to the campsite, but it wasn't where I thought it was. Nothing but darkness. I think the sculling of the beers hit me quicker than I thought, and maybe I walked further than I realized to relieve myself. I was now lost in the forest. I began trying to find my way back when I saw a light. I headed towards the light and I soon realized that it was a car headlight. I figured whoever it was would be able to help me. The closer I got, I realized I recognized the car. It was the car that I helped get out of a ditch earlier that day. Before I could reach the car, I heard this huge scream. Within about a minute, I saw two masked men jump into the car and speed off. I ran towards the screams and suddenly I was back at my campsite. They all looked horrified, scared out of their minds. I asked them what had happened. They told me two masked men appeared out of nowhere. They didn't say anything at first. They just stared at everyone. It was this real, surreal moment of silence. Then one of the men said, "He's not here." The other man appeared frustrated and then shoved one of my friends to the ground. It's this that made one of my female friends scream, the scream that I'd heard. The men then ran off. It may have been a coincidence, but somehow I think those masked men were looking for me. I've never been so happy to have been lost in my life. This happened back when my son was 9 months old. He was sleeping in his own room that my husband had just completed upgrading, and we decided it was a good idea to keep a baby monitor in there so we would hear him when he wakes up from his naps or during the night. The monitor did not have video, it was strictly sound. Nothing odd happened for quite a while, but over time I noticed something was different. My son would normally wake up during the night and I would usually go into his room and comfort him and then he would go back to sleep. This wasn't happening anymore. I would hear my son and give him a few minutes to try and settle, and it seemed that this process was working. I no longer needed to comfort him. This seemed to be the theme for the next week or so, but one night my son woke and was crying. I swear I could hear humming and shushing coming from his room, and then silence. My son was no longer crying. I rushed into his room and there was nothing suspicious. He was sleeping peacefully, nothing out of place. Everything was normal. One morning I was awake but resting and my husband got up as he had to go to work. About 20 minutes later, I once again heard my son wake up. I heard him being attended to and very quickly my son was making no noise. He must be peacefully sleeping again. Another 20 minutes later, I decided I would text my husband and thank him for sorting out our son before he went to work. His response is something that I'll never forget, and it will forever haunt me. He said, "I didn't sort him out this morning. He was still asleep when I left." My eyes widened. Adrenaline hit. What is happening in my son's room? I ran into his room and swung the door open. Thankfully, my son was in there, but he was no longer in his cot. He was on the floor. He has clearly had his nappy changed and is in a new outfit, plus was drinking from a freshly warm bottle. If my husband didn't do this, then who did? I quickly took the bottle from my son, picked him up, took him out of the house and called the police. The police arrived quickly and 2 officers went into the house to search. 10 minutes later they came out, but they weren't alone. With them, in handcuffs, was a woman, an old woman, could have been in her 60s. As the police took her into the back of the squad car, she was just staring at my son. Right before they put her in the car, she gave my son the scariest smile, which chilled me right to my core, something I will never forget. The police said that they had a look around the house and decided to look in my crawlspace. Quickly, it became evident that someone was living there. It didn't take them long to find the old lady, and thankfully, she went with them peacefully. Fortunately, my son was okay. I contacted my husband and he came straight home, except with him, he had a new baby monitor, but this one had the video function. I now find myself hooked to looking at this monitor, terrified there may be someone in the room with my son. I've always been good friends with one of my cousins, who we'll call Cole, who's the same age as I am. The two of us were not quite inseparable, but we always did get along very well together and were often found together, both in school, as we'd always wound up in the same class together. When we were 12 and in the 6th grade, I was hanging out with Cole on a Friday afternoon, and at one point my mum called to say that our grandpa was in the hospital. While the issue with our grandpa wasn't expected to be life-threatening, he was being kept at the hospital overnight for observation. I was told that I was given the okay to stay at Cole's house for the night, with Cole's 15-year-old brother, who we'll call Hunter, being in charge while our parents were out. We ordered out for pizza and enjoyed goofing off as boys that age tend to do. At around 9 p.m. or so, there was a knock at the front door and Cole went to answer it. I was a bit curious as to who it could be at that time of the night, and so I watched from a ways back. At the door were 2 older guys. They said that they were with the city and that they were investigating reports about the water pressure supposedly being bad in the neighborhood. They asked Cole if his parents were home, and when Cole said they were unavailable at that moment, which we were told to say to strangers if our parents weren't home, the guys started asking a bunch of questions about how the water pressure was in the house and if they could come inside to check. Hunter came over at that point and politely told the guys that the water pressure was fine and perhaps they should move on to check on other homes in the neighborhood. The guys seemed reluctant to leave, but turned away and walked after Hunter started closing the door. After the door was shut, we looked at each other and shrugged, but didn't think too much of it after that and went back to goofing off. Eventually, we decided to go to bed. Cole and Hunter shared a bedroom, and we all agreed that I'd sleep in there with them, and Hunter grabbed a sleeping bag out of their camping supplies for me. When we got in the bedroom, they stripped down to their briefs. Since I hadn't originally planned on staying the night, I hadn't brought anything with me from home as far as overnight stuff, but since I wasn't in the mood to sleep in my clothes, I also stripped down to my briefs. Early the next morning, I got up because I had to pee. On the way back to the bedroom, I heard something in the family room, which was on the opposite end of the house. I didn't pay too much attention to it at the time, thinking it must be either Cole or Hunter, until I got back into the bedroom and I realized that both of them were still asleep in their beds. Trying not to panic, I woke them and told them that I thought someone was in the house. They quietly followed me, and the moment we walked into the family room, we saw the 2 guys from the night before in there, and it was rather clear that they were robbing the place. One of them started moving towards us as he pulled out a wicked-looking knife. The three of us promptly raced to the front door and we fled outside. As luck would have it, a cop was driving by at that particular moment, and within a couple of minutes, several other cops were there as well, and they proceeded to enter the house, and after some searching, they caught the two guys. To add insult to injury, while we were standing outside while the cops searched the house, both to get the two guys and make sure there was no one else with them, some of the neighbours came out to see what the commotion was about, and this included some kids who went to the same school as Cole and myself, including a few who were in the 6th grade class with us. It was during that time that the three of us realised that we'd never had the chance to get dressed, so, just like in the stereotypical nightmare, we had to stand outside in full view of everyone in just our briefs for what seemed like forever, before being allowed back inside. When we went back to school on Monday, Cole and I had to put up with more than a bit of snickering, stares, and ribbing for the next few weeks until school ended for the summer. I don't know what sentence the guys got, but I hope I never run into them ever again. My last semester at a certain college, I was assaulted by a football player for walking where he was trying to drive. Note that he weighed 325 pounds, I was only 120. Whilst unconscious on the ground, I lived a different life. I met a wonderful young lady. She made my heart skip and my face red. I pursued her for months and dispatched a few jerk boyfriends before I finally won her over. After 2 years, we got married, and almost immediately, we birthed our first daughter. I had a great job, and my wife didn't have to work outside of the house. When my daughter was 2, my wife and I birthed our second child, a beautiful baby boy. My son was the joy of my life. I would walk into his room every morning before I left for work and doted on him and my daughter. One day, while sitting on the couch, I noticed that the perspective of the lamp was odd, like inverted. It was still in 3D, but just wrong. It was a square lamp base, red with gold trim, on 4 legs and a white square shade. I was transfixed. I couldn't look away from it. I stayed up all night staring at it. The next morning I didn't go to work. Something was just not right about that lamp. I stopped eating. I left the couch only to use the bathroom at first. Soon I stopped that too, as I was not eating or drinking. I stared at the fucking lamp for 3 days before my wife got really worried. She had someone come and try to talk to me. By this time, my awareness of my surroundings was breaking up, and my wife was freaking out. She took the kids to her mother's house just before I had my epiphany. The lamp is not real. This house is not real. My wife, my kids, none of it is real. The last 10 years of my life are not fucking real. The lamp started to grow wider and deeper. It was still inverted dimensions. It took up my entire perspective, and all I could see was red. I heard voices, screams, all kinds of weird noises, and I became aware of pain. A fucking shit ton of pain. The first words I said were, "I'm missing teeth," and opened my eyes. I was laying on my back on the sidewalk, surrounded by people that I didn't know. Lots were freaking out, and I was just completely confused. At some point, a cop scooped me up, dragged me across the sidewalk and grass, and threw me face down into the back of a cop car. I was still confused. I was taken to the hospital by the cop. Seems he didn't want to wait for the ambulance to arrive and give CT scans and other checks. I went through about 3 years of horrid depression. I was grieving the loss of my wife and children and dealing with the knowledge that they never existed. I was scared that I was going insane, as I would cry myself to sleep, hoping I would see her in my dreams. I never have, but sometimes I see my son, usually just a glimpse out of my peripheral vision. He is perpetually 5 years old, and I can never hear what he says.